Good afternoon. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. We are following the latest on the war in Ukraine as a senior U.S. official tells ABC that indiscriminate bombing from Russia will only get worse. Ukrainian President Zelensky gave a passionate plea to more than 300 members of Congress today. In an hour-long call, Zelensky asked for more military aid and for a full ban of Russian oil imports into the U.S. Before that call, Zelensky said Ukrainian forces are still holding the line on all key fronts. He claimed more than 10,000 Russian troops have been killed in the war so far. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin is responding to Zelensky's calls for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Putin says that he would consider any countries that impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine as taking part in the conflict. This comes as Ukrainian officials say Russia broke a promised ceasefire in the country's port city of Mariupol, despite agreeing to temporarily stopping heavy shelling so that civilians could escape. We're also learning that WNBA player and two-time U.S. gold medalist Brittany Griner is reportedly being detained in Russia for allegedly having vape cartridges in her luggage at the Moscow airport. Griner plays for the Phoenix Mercury. The WNBA says their main priority is her swift and safe return to the United States. But we begin with the more than 1.3 million Ukrainians who have been forced to flee their homes since this invasion started. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says more than half of those refugees are in neighboring Poland. One woman was getting ready to marry the love of her life, planning their wedding. But instead of getting to kiss him at the altar 1 week ago, she kissed him goodbye at the border. ABC's Phil Lipoff is in Poland with her story.
It's women, it's children.
Oksana and her two children, Vlad and Anastasia, crossed the border days ago. They made it to this hotel in Lublin, welcomed by a country that opened its border and its heart, something Oksana says is the reason they are alive.
I can cry to all the world.
She has been crying for days, relieved her children are safe, but terrified for her husband and Anastasia's fiancé still in Ukraine.
To the Polish people, I want to say thank you very much for the man who helps to Ukrainian women, to Ukrainian children, to all Ukrainian people with the food, with clothes, with nappies to the children, with the food to the small babies. And the Polish is the first country who opened their home, who opened the door to our children, to our women to be safe.
The trauma of the last 2 weeks bringing Oksana to her knees, but she's not begging for mercy. She's thanking the country that gave it to her without being asked. The Polish people saying, you're safe here for as long as you need to be. We understand. Anastasia was due to be married just after the fighting began. Now separated from her fiancé, he's in their town taking incoming fire from the Russians. Her phone is her only connection to him and the terror he is facing daily. She installed an app on her phone that alerts her to air raid sirens back home.
Basically, this is how it looks. So, for example, green light means that the alarm went off and you can get out. And if you receive a red one with a huge noise on it, it means that please hide and stay safe.
Every time you hear that here in Poland, you worry about people back in Ukraine.
Yeah, I send messages. Are you in a shelter? Are you okay? What's going on?
Safe from explosions here in Poland, but not from what she has seen and heard and what she still fears.
I hear noises which remind me of bombs or guns or whatever. I wake up and I still don't understand that I'm in Poland, I'm safe, nothing can happen to me.
And Phil Lipoff joins me live now from Lublin, Poland. Phil, these stories, I mean, it's hard not to get enthralled in them and not empathize with these people. So talk about the next step for refugees like Oksana. Where do they go if this lasts a while, and what provisions are being made for them?
Diane, that's a great question, and it's a question every refugee here is asking and, quite frankly, fearing the answer to. Take Oksana, for instance. She's taking her two children to Malta off the coast of Italy because she has a support structure there. She worked there for 16 years, and she knows people, but she'll be there without her husband. Other refugees staying with family and friends here in Poland, and specifically in the Lublin area where I am, and yet still other refugees have nothing here, know no one, and will have to be using the government for help, for food, for shelter. But the Polish government has committed to helping everyone who comes into this country with whatever they need. And so far, more than 750,000 Ukrainian refugees have come here.
All right, Phil Lipoff in Lublin, Poland. Thank you, Phil. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken is also in Poland today for talks with top officials there. He calls this one of the most urgent moments in the long history of friendship between our two countries. Those talks come as civilian areas of Ukraine are being hit by Russian attacks. Matt Gutman has more from Lviv, Ukraine.
That merciless Russian onslaught against civilian targets intensifying. Social media video showing an apartment complex in Chernihiv, north of Kyiv, fires still smoldering. Survivors screaming and scurrying for cover. 47 people killed, according to authorities. The Russians also targeting a school west of the capital, gutting the building, charred textbooks amidst the debris. The Russians also taking the southern city of Kherson and focusing their fire on Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv. Russia reportedly violating a 5-hour ceasefire in the hard-hit cities of Mariupol and Volnovakha in the east. Ukrainian officials now saying the Russians shelled the humanitarian corridor as civilians tried to flee. Authorities in those cities calling off the evacuation of civilians and urging them to get into bomb shelters. Ukraine's president criticizing NATO for rebuffing his plea for a no-fly zone and saying all of the people who die from this day forward will die because of you. Zelensky posting another video on social media, both proof of life and encouragement to his people, affirming he is still in Kyiv. Nobody ran away. We are still working, he said. I'm here in my place. NATO has accused Russia of using cluster bombs in Ukraine, which kill indiscriminately and are banned under international law.
The suffering we've already seen is likely to get worse before it gets better for as long as Russia pursues these methods.
The U.S. and NATO are supplying weapons and diplomatic cover, condemning Russia for attacking this nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia. But the fire just 1,500 feet from the reactors was put out and no radiation detected.
By the grace of God, the world narrowly averted a nuclear catastrophe last night.
Meantime, Ukraine sabotaging bridges to slow the advance of a Russian column that at one point had been 40 miles long. It appears stalled about 17 miles from Kyiv. And everywhere in this besieged country, men and women joining a budding resistance. In a bomb-proof basement, these men learning the mechanics of AK-47s. Outside, guns pointed at this car. It's a dry run. Civilians learning how to operate checkpoints and spot Russian infiltrators. And these women learning the basics of combat medicine, how to carry the wounded and twist on tourniquets.
Okay, and what kind of things are you learning how to do?
To stop bleeding, to stop blood loss, and to help the injured soldier to breathe.
Good.
Our thanks to Matt Gutman for that report. And as Matt mentioned, cities across Ukraine are experiencing relentless attacks from Russia right now. Rivne is a city just a few hours west of Kyiv near Belarus. Today, their mayor had a phone call with President Zelensky and NATO leaders. And Mayor Alexander Treknek joins me now live with more on this. Mayor, thank you for being here. What can you tell us about this call with President Zelensky and NATO leaders?
Yes, hello, and I just want to say thank you for those who are trying to support Ukraine. So today we were speaking with all mayors of Ukraine. We were speaking with President Zelensky about our demand. We demand, as Ukraine, as a country, we demand non-fly zone over Ukrainian skies. So this is the most we need right now, because we have to say that Russia, this is a terrorist country. And terrorist has been stopped. Hundreds and hundreds destroyed houses, hundreds killed civilians and children among them. So we want to see immediately reaction of West. So we don't want to hear about deep concern. We want to see real action from the West. So we challenge all leaders. We ask NATO leaders to start the process on non-fly zone over Ukraine.
Now, Mayor, what is it like in Rivne right now, in your city? How are you and your community holding up right now?
Right now, we are preparing for any situation. So my people, my community, just so well organized. And we have a lot of volunteers who are helping for needy people. Right now, hundreds and hundreds tons of humanitarian aid just directed to east of Ukraine and central Ukraine for the needy people. So we are very close to Belarus, and I have to say that every night we have some warning about breaking our border with Belarus. So, but I hope that President Lukashenko and his militaries, they never will break our border. But Russia make a pressure on Lukashenko and the Belarusians to do it. So we have a very tense situation on the border. And I have to say about my people of my community, you know, this is so badly situation when you have to wake up at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and you hear the air raid warning, and you have to flee to bomb shelters and so on. So the basic emotion is a fear, but right now I have to say that we don't afraid Putin. We don't afraid Russia. We are going to fight, and we are going to win this battle.
So as you prepare for that fight, what are you doing to prepare, and what are you most concerned about, especially given you are right there on the border that you say you are watching very closely?
Yeah, we're helping for our militaries. We are a well-organized community. We already have a territorial defense. We have a lot of guns and people ready to protect our city and our region. So every home, every street has their own territorial defense. Actually, we are just helping for our militaries. We're trying to help them to be brave. Right now, we have some trainings for medical help. We do some trainings like fire trainings. We train our guys to have a good relation with a gun, so on. So very widespread preparation for any situation. I have to say that on our city just a couple days ago, Russians, they were firing by the rocket, and this rocket destroyed some part of our airport here in Rivne. So we are very angry with Russians, and we are ready for everything.
And Mayor Traknak, I know you recently posted a video on social media. I want to take a look at that for a moment.
Every next minute of delay will lead to the death of civilians. We don't want to hear about deep concern. We want to see your real actions. Please, act in the name of the Lord. We ask you.
So what motivated you to post that video, and what is it that you consider real action?
Yeah, we, together with our President Zelensky, together with our Ministry of Defense, with our militaries, and all over the mayors all over the Ukraine, we demand this. We demand non-fly zone over Ukraine. So please help us. Please start to do something in this case. So everybody in Ukraine, every Ukrainian demand this. Actually, especially those who lost their loved one.
All right, Mayor Alexander Traknak, we appreciate your time today, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
And coming up, the growing bipartisan calls to ban Russian oil here in the U.S. Plus, a look at two famous brothers now fighting to save their country in Ukraine. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Ukraine's President Zelensky has just finished an hour-long call with more than 300 U.S. lawmakers. Zelensky told officials that he needs more lethal aid and is in desperate need of a no-fly zone. The call comes as a growing number of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are calling for a U.S. ban on Russian oil. ABC's White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks is here with more on all of that. Mary Alice, what are some of the key takeaways from this call that Zelensky just had with U.S. politicians?
Yeah, Diane, like you said, the call lasted over an hour, and sources telling us that it was a really emotional call, a passionate plea from President Zelensky, just asking, like you said, for more help, not only calling for that ban on Russian oil, but asking for Americans and for the American military and NATO allies to enforce a no-fly zone. Of course, the White House has been asked about this, and President Biden has been pretty resolute that that would mean putting American military sort of in direct conflict with the Russian military, that to enforce a no-fly zone, you could be looking at essentially American military planes shooting down Russian military planes. And we have heard President Biden say for weeks that when Americans start shooting at Russians, that is World War III. Of course, we're hearing from senators really a mixed reaction. Some are very, very concerned about that idea. They do not want to put American military in direct conflict with Russian military planes, with Russian troops. On the other hand, more and more are just having such a hard time watching these images. We all are having such a hard time watching these images, and you really feel that urgency in Washington right now. These responses from senators, they are just looking for any other way to support President Zelensky, support Ukrainians fighting on the ground. They're talking about whether there's a way to get more American planes just into the hands of Ukrainians, if there's a way to get more lethal military aid into their hands that they could use on their own. And like you said, more and more of a call for the White House to start a ban on Russian oil as well. So far, those big sanctions on the Russian government and Russian banks have stopped short of going after Russia's biggest export, its oil. Diane.
And Mary Alice, how unusual is it for a foreign leader like Vladimir Zelensky to try to make a plea directly to Congress members in the U.S.? And is this likely to budge the White House in any way in terms of that ban on Russian oil, or the call for the ban on Russian oil, calls for a no-fly zone, things the White House has really resisted up until this point?
Yeah, Diane, it's not that unusual, especially when we're talking about a wartime situation like this. Remember, a lot of members of Congress, a lot of sitting senators have met with President Zelensky over the years. There was such an excitement about his new administration there in Ukraine, his pull towards democracy, trying to revitalize Ukrainian institutions, trying to be closer with the West and root out corruption. And a lot of senators over the last few years have been trying to support him in that work. So there's already some relationship there between members of Congress and Zelensky's administration. And then, you know, in the last few days and weeks, like we've been talking about so much, President Zelensky has just inspired so many with his fighting and his sort of with his resolute of fighting back and bravery and courage. And you're really hearing these sitting senators, these sitting lawmakers talk about that, you know, emotionally talk about how moved they are by Zelensky. And I think that we're going to continue to see members of Congress really looking to stay in close contact with his administration, because if his administration were to fall, they're very worried about how in the world they would support Ukrainians on the ground.
Right, and we know that U.S. lawmakers from both sides of the aisle have been joining this sort of growing call to ban Russian oil, at least. So I know you'll be watching those developments closely, Mary Alice. We'll be checking in with you throughout the day. Thank you. And for more on the economic fallout from Russia from international sanctions, let's go over to Paul Massaro, a senior policy advisor for the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe. Paul, thanks for being here. I know we've seen how these sanctions have already hit Russia's economy. The ruble's value has plummeted. The stock market there has been closed. Companies are halting any business they were doing there. What sticks out to you, though, about how these sanctions have been implemented so far? Any surprises here?
So the sanctions that have been imposed upon Russia are historic. We've never seen anything like this used. Russia is totally and completely isolated. It's really the collapse of the economy, but also sort of removing Russia from the globalized economy and watching all these, as you say, these businesses pull out. It is extraordinary. I mean, I think it's unique. And I think one of the most striking things is how little it's actually impacted Western markets. In fact, we seem to have been able to accomplish this at so far, very little cost to ourselves, although that may change if we make the final move to sanction oil and gas.
But it also doesn't seem to be impacting the battlefield. One expert that ABC News spoke with this week said that, quote, banks don't stop tanks. So how likely do you think these sanctions are to change Putin's behavior in the short term in terms of this invasion?
Well, it's funny that expert would say that, because often in our field we say it's the banks, not the tanks.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, it's usually reversed when I guess you come at it from the economic and financial perspective, as we often do. I absolutely think that this is going into Putin's calculation. Losing your entire industrial capacity, being hit in this economic way is huge. We've seen stalled convoys, lack of fuel, lack of food, the logistics of the Russian military absolutely falling apart. We are at day 10 now, and Putin is having to resort to really brutal, horrific crackdowns in Russia, complete close of free press, jailing of all protesters, making it illegal to tell the truth about what's going on in this war. So I think that we're at this juncture where Putin is either going to have to engage in kind of a sort of face-saving ceasefire, the sort of declare victory and go home kind of thing, or the worst scenario where Putin decides to engage in a brutal campaign of destruction.
So, Paul, really quick, you attribute the reports of the lack of food and fuel to the troops as tied to these sanctions?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, the sanctions are certainly a part of why we're seeing the breakdown of the Russian military. I mean, it takes money to run a war, right? It takes $20 billion a day to keep this going. And Putin just doesn't have access to that any longer.
All right. Paul Massaro from the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe. Paul, we appreciate your time as always. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And now to the story of two Ukrainian brothers who fought their way to the top of the heavyweight boxing world. Now they're fighting to defend their country on the battlefield. ABC's Patrick Revel brings us the report on the Klitschko brothers.
Vitaly Klitschko was a decorated heavyweight champion.
Down goes Johnson. And that is a great performance for Vitaly Klitschko.
And now he's the mayor of Kyiv, at the helm in a very different fight for his country. Kyiv, until a few days ago a relaxed, vibrant capital, is now a city facing a siege from Russian military forces, seeing the early signs of a potential humanitarian crisis. Supply lines are disrupted, meaning shortages for both food and medicine. These patients are waiting in the basement of a children's hospital, afraid to leave for fear that outside only worse awaits them.
We're running out of food. Local charity funds promised to bring some. We're waiting for them to come and bring us bread, essentials, and some juice for children.
But despite facing tens of thousands of approaching Russian troops, residents are taking up arms to defend their city. Ordinary people lining up to pick up assault rifles, anti-tank grenades. Mayor Klitschko is helping organize the defense with one message for the Russians.
Go back home. You have nothing to find here.
Klitschko, along with his brother Vladimir, who was also a heavyweight champion, has vowed to defend Ukraine. Once fighting for glory, now they're in the fight for their city and country. 5 years apart, both brothers dominated the sport, with Vitaly becoming world champion in 1999 and Vladimir in 2000. Although as a promise to their mother, they've never fought each other. They both earned PhDs in sports science, getting them the nicknames Dr. Steelhammer and Dr. Iron Fist. Vitaly retired after a 13-fight winning streak in 2012, deciding to enter into the world of politics, eventually becoming mayor of Kyiv in 2014. They're pleading with the international community for aid and more sanctions.
Don't let it happen, continue happening in Ukraine. Don't let it happening in Europe and eventually in the world.
With more Russian forces continuing to advance towards Kyiv, the brothers are trying to rally the defense, sending out messages through their social media accounts, reminding Ukrainians of their strength.
Тільки разом ми вистоїмо. Слава Україні!
Our thanks to Patrick Revel for that report. And I'm Diane Macedo. Our thanks to you for joining us. And do stay with ABC News Live as we continue with news, context, and analysis right after this.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.